Mike J, so to land the plane with that weekend, how does recruiting work, do you think, or envision, if it's going to be an OV weekend around the events that are going to happen in April?
Well, I don't know yet that it will be because they've set up a lot of visits for people in
Oh,
June. I'm not entirely sure what it looks like in terms of visits for whatever is going to happen on April 26th. Because that was obviously a big part of the spring game appeal, was that you could bring in a lot of recruits. Last year, they used it as an official visit weekend, and they didn't land anybody specifically because of that weekend. You ended up with Cortez Mills and Dawson Merritt, who committed, that came in that weekend, but really the Colorado game was as big, if not bigger, for those two guys, as they ended up committing to other schools in Nebraska. So I don't know how much official visits will ultimately matter for whatever happens at the end of April, but you were able to bring in, over 100 recruits most of the time for the spring game. A lot of it was getting guys in that were sophomores from other areas. Like I'm pretty sure, take Titan Davis, for example. I'm pretty sure he came in for the 2023 spring game, and that was his introduction to the new Nebraska staff. He had been recruited by the previous one, but then he's able to kind of like build that relationship sort of going forward. That was an introductory point with Matt Rhule and those guys. And then now you could make the case that Titan Davis is the single biggest recruit that Nebraska is going after in this class, now that it appears that they're out for Jackson Cantwell. So it has a lot of value in terms of younger recruits, area guys. It is a great opportunity to get recruits from Colorado, South Dakota, Kansas, Iowa, Missouri to come in for a Saturday. And then you would see the staff kind of prioritize because they can't spend time with everybody. So I don't know how you're going to be able to replace that aspect of it. The official visit thing will be interesting because as it is right now, anyone that I've talked to or seen on our site that's talked about a Nebraska official visit, it's all been in the month of June. So I haven't seen a whole lot that has come out in terms of April for visits. But I know there's a lot of people that are expecting to take visits for spring practices, which Nebraska did a tremendous job of last year. I think the best that I've ever covered in terms of getting really high quality players to come in for a practice. And I think that we know enough of Matt Rhule now, 3 years into this thing. He wants recruits to see them practice. It is a point of emphasis when he's recruiting that he wants these guys to have that visual of what his coaches are like at practice, what practice is like, what the expectations are like, how it is run. I think that's a really important thing to him. And I think that's why they try to get a lot of the key guys in for a practice before they even come in for an official visit or a game weekend.
Mike J, it's interesting as I know you had the write up on EJ, Coach Barthel, and his presence. I think he was actually working the clinic at the Glacier Clinic in St. Louis, and just the importance of St. Louis. And this is on the heels of him getting his new deal done. And I asked this question to Ravi. It's kind of tongue in cheek, just because I was being petty that I don't think people appreciate kind of what he does, from developing his guys to recruiting across the board. But are you surprised that there seems to be such a disconnect in terms of how Nebraska values him versus what the fans kind of perceive in terms of the job that he's done with the running backs room as it relates to their play?
I'm not super surprised, because I would say that I'm at least a portion of that disconnect, because just if I stack up how recruiting has gone for EJ Barthel versus, say, Rob Dvorak, or, different people that came in at the same time, it's harder to slot in specific names with EJ Barthel. Now, at the same time, I had a really good conversation with a high school coach in St. Louis that was at that clinic that knows EJ really well. And he talks about just what he's like when he comes into St. Louis and the value that he's created for Nebraska and that community, and the way that he reflects Matt Rhule when he's there. Like he basically went as far as to say EJ Barthel is like a mini Matt Rhule. When guys get to sit down and talk to EJ Barthel, it's like Matt Rhule is being represented, even if he's not in the same room. And he thought that was a really valuable aspect that EJ brings to the recruitment. And so the more I have dug in and talked to people, there's definitely more value than what has been brought in terms of total commitments. I think the other thing that's relatively hard is that at the running back position, it's Emmett Johnson has come from third string or further the last 2 years. So then it's a question of, are they not evaluating well enough to determine their best running back? Like, how often do we? And it's not just an EJ Barthel thing. I think he's also paying for the. I think he's paying for the sins of previous staffs. I mean, people are and I'm led the charge of this. You've done enough radio interviews with me in the last decade. I have been very critical of running back play because it hasn't been good enough. And so I think some of it is people want to see the running backs make a real jump. And so you kind of hold EJ Barthel against that. It's difficult because he's in a position where he has one player that's on the field. Like when I talk about Rob Dvorak and I wax poetic about what he's done, he has multiple bites at the apple, if you will, whereas EJ Barthel is largely condensed to just one player. So how you felt about Dante Dowdell or Emmett Johnson, when they were in, would be reflective of how people felt about EJ Barthel. Now, the running back play hasn't been out of this world. It's been fine. And so I think that's sort of reflected in how people talk about him. The recruiting hasn't been amazing, and the on-field play hasn't been amazing, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have a ton of value internally. I think it tells you a lot that they kept him. I think it tells you a lot that Texas and other schools were interested. And I have to square all of that up, because if you would have asked me in November, I wouldn't have ranked him particularly high. If you're like, hey, give me the value scale before the staff change, give me the value scale of how you perceive all these guys and how maybe they're perceived internally. But part of that is you have to talk and you have to look and you have to listen. I mean, these are all things that are part of it. But the production hasn't necessarily been there from the running backs or from the recruiting to just make people go head over heels. It doesn't mean that he's not working, though. It doesn't mean that he isn't doing good stuff behind the scenes. It's just the forward-facing, front-facing stuff that fans are going to see. I mean, it's just kind of what it is. The results are fine.
Let me ask you something, Schaefer, and I want to get to hoops here. And I guess with a new clock, we can do what we want if you have another 28 minutes. Kidding, but not really.
I have you tell me when I'm out.
Okay, so let me ask, why do you think, because I would make the case, like if you and I know, and hopefully we get that sit down or whenever you come up where we can spend some time together, but could I make the case to you if I said, you know what, Schaefer, I don't get it. I look at how Dowdell was 2 years ago versus how he left this program. I look at Emmett when he first got here to what I've seen. I saw the relationship built to get Ramir to hang in there. I think Mekhi Nelson is significantly better physically than people have yet to really see. I think Quentin Ives has come a long way. What could I just make the case that guys get better the longer they're around them and have that be a conversation starter?
Yeah, I think you can make that case. I think the hard thing is that you have to weigh that case of you being in the building, in different areas of the building, watching different things than what the average fan sees. Anyone that's watched Nebraska football over the last 2 years.
But everybody could see Dowdell last spring to Dowdell this year.
Sure. And he made a big jump. There's no question about that. But it's just like the way we talk about Nebraska going from 5-7 to, 7-6. It's progress. It's better, but it's not where people think this program should be. I mean, part of playing the running back position at Nebraska is that you're weighed against Amon Green, you're weighed against Rex Burkhead, you're weighed against Amir Abdullah, you're weighed against Lawrence Phillips, you're weighed against one-season wonders like Brandon Jackson, you're weighed against great, great, great players around here. And Nebraska's running backs have been solid. I stopped short of even saying they've been good. Like, I don't think they've had Divine Ozigbo had a good season. Nebraska hasn't had a great season since Amir Abdullah. They've had one good season from an individual running back. They were effective at times last year, but they couldn't take over the game. They couldn't carry things for Dylan Raiola. Now, what does it look like with Dana Holgorsen calling the running game? Because it looked a lot better in the final 4 games of the season than it did earlier. I love what they were doing by getting those linemen, the interior guys, getting them out pulling. The game plan against Wisconsin and how they ran the ball against Wisconsin, if that's a preview of what it's going to look like in 2025, I think Emmett Johnson's going to be a really, really good player. But until that all happens, it's a lot of conjecture. I mean, we've heard so much about Quentin Ives. What have we seen? We saw a 2-yard touchdown run. That's all we know about Quentin Ives. All I can tell you is that Nebraska beat out Monmouth for him, and nobody else was recruiting him at the FBS level. So there's a lot of wait and see at the running back, and people have been waiting and waiting and waiting. We haven't seen that much yet. But that's the thing with that position. And the hard part is EJ Barthel and these running backs are weighed against a history where you can make the case that outside of maybe defensive back or, certainly offensive line, like running back has been one of the most premier positions in Nebraska football history. And so for them to be in this cycle where it's just very average to below average year in and year out, and people that remember what it was like when the third string guy, who's currently talking to me on the radio right now, could come in and run for 100 yards and win the Orange Bowl MVP, those days are so far removed from where we're at. And I know it takes way more than just a running back for that, but that's what it's up against. It's a really we talk about it from the program perspective. Think about it from individual positions. Like, people have high expectations for running backs, and they haven't been anywhere near them here.